And with that, we are live. How's it going, everybody? I know a lot of you came over from the Non Sequitur show, so thank you for that. If you have not been on this channel yet, I'm Suris. Normally, I'm hiding behind a cartoon avatar as opposed to here. But I'm here today with Ocean Keltoi, and we're going to be going over some arguments that I had posited in another video and seeing why they're possibly valid or invalid. Also, we've already got a dislike on the video, so I think we're starting well.
Yep, that seems to be going in the right direction.
Yes. Perfect.
And I am hiding behind an avatar here, so since you're not hiding behind your cartoon, I'm doing the work for you.
Fair enough. One of us has to hide.
This is my face, though, so I guess that's still there.
I've been told that I look close enough to my cartoon for it to not matter anyway. So
the difference and you have the hammer too. So
well, I had the hammer. Did you not see that it broke?
What happened?
The hammer split in half on another stream. The core of it actually has a very thin core, and the core ended up finally snapping because of the amount of abuse I was putting the hammer through for other videos. So like during the video where I was talking about urine therapy after the Non Sequitur show, I was slamming my head with the hammer, and I was using a lot of force, like enough to require headache meds afterwards. And I guess the handle not necessarily, because I wanted the sound. I wanted the sound of the hammer hitting my head, and the only way for me to do that was by physically bludgeoning myself. But of course, the end result of that is that the hammer's broken. For those who have not seen, here we are.
And you busted it.
Yep, but you see what I mean? How the core is really thin.
It's done. It's done.
I can probably repair it, but that's a project for another day. I will deal with that later. I already make boffer weapons, so I know how to do the repair job. I'm just also very lazy.
I can feel that.
But with that said, so for those who have not seen the video yet, and I'm not saying hop off the stream to go see the video and then get angry at me, because that seems to be the common trend. But
I think a lot of the comments were in favor. Like when I was reading through it, there were some people that agreed with you.
Yeah, there were some. If I were to compare the response to that video to the response to any other video I've done, though, it was definitely
that's probably true. It's definitely one of your more controversial ventures.
No, but that was exactly what I wanted. I knew I was not going to be making friends with the video when I walked in, so here we are. But the original reason I made the video was because most of those arguments, from what I've been able to see by talking to other theists, is that those arguments have very common apologetics that can be used to explain them. Whether or not you want to use the word apologetics for it, I don't necessarily care. But the point is those arguments have answers. They've had answers in some cases for decades, sometimes
I'd use more. Apologetics. Some of them for centuries, even.
Some of them for centuries. Oh. And in fact, actually, the one we're going to start with has a bit of a history that some people don't realize, which is the argument from the stone. So for those who are not familiar, the argument from the stone is, can God create a stone so heavy he cannot lift it? And there's a few caveats here. So obviously the conclusions that some people come with are, if he can create the stone so heavy, then he doesn't have the power to lift something. If he can't create the stone, then he doesn't have the power to create something in that realm, so he's not omnipotent. There's a few ways around this. The first thing I want to get out of the way that I've seen in the comment section, there's a difference between build and create. As far as creation goes, we have never once witnessed creation. We have never once witnessed what I would define as creation. Ocean, would you like to clarify the difference between building something like a car and creating something like a deity would do?
Creating something would be out of nothing.
Yes.
As far as like when you're trying to define it from the divine, and then building it would be out of what exists already. So you might say that to an extent, God built Adam.
Since he used dust, he did a golden
used dust,
snow.
And then he built Eve out of the ribs. So it's,
yes.
God created man tends to be the nomenclature, but with that distinction, it would be built.
Yes,
using that
we're talking about, say, the cosmos. The cosmos would be a creation of God, something that doesn't have any matter from the beginning to utilize in order to make other types of matter from.
Right. As first, Michael in the chat is a smart kid. He's saying that there's no such thing as a rock that God can't lift. It's like a square circle, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into as well. That we were talking about how these are bad arguments that atheists put forward, and that this is a bad argument because it's essentially putting forward something that doesn't make coherent sense. Considering the definition of God that's being discussed, it winds up like a lot of these kind of questions, it creates a straw man in the conversation when talking about the Christian God. And when you're talking about like a God that doesn't have like these omni-traits, then a God creating something that's so big they can't lift it isn't a problem. It doesn't. You can say yes or no. It depends on the limitations of that God. But with a God that's omnipotent, it just becomes an absurd question because his power is infinite. That means that there is no such thing as a rock that God cannot lift. So,
Yeah. So for instance,
the answer would be no, because it's not a logical possibility.
Yeah, if a God were to start on that project, he would be at that project forever, because he would be constantly feeding infinite power into a stone that would be constantly growing at an infinite rate. It's a contradiction within itself. It just can't work.
Right. The consequence of that is that if God is able to create a rock so big that he can't lift it, then he's able to violate logic.
Yes.
Now, when God is able to violate logic, the God then becomes a proposition that is illogical by definition.
Yeah.
And then what position are we holding at that point? It doesn't.
At that point, especially if you've got somebody, and I know you've had interactions with him, Matt Slick. Neither of us are huge fans of him.
No, I don't think so.
Matt Slick has this common apologetic that how do you account for the laws of logic? God is the source of the laws of logic. Laws of logic apply to everything, including God. That's
Transcendental argument.
Yeah, yes. That's Matt Slick's thing, and so the argument from the stone cannot work with that particular type of God. But that's where we get into. One of the common apologetics for it is that, okay, it's not that God is omnipotent in every way, shape, and form. It's that God is logically omnipotent. And so you have to argue from the logically omnipotent God, not the God that has the full omnipotent trait.
I want to make the point as well that the rock thing, if the Christian says no, that their God can't make a rock so big that he can't lift it, that doesn't sacrifice anything in their position.
No. And
to suggest that it does is engaging dishonestly in the conversation. Like, there's a lot of ways you can criticize Christianity. I know I've done it. That's not one of them. That's one because the Christian is describing what they believe, they're then wrong somehow.
Yes.
And that doesn't make that's not a good argument.
Well, not to mention a belief can be wrong. A belief can be wrong. It's only knowledge that can't be wrong. They can believe something that's incorrect, and that's fine.
You're not going to... If someone describes their belief in a way that is coherent, that's not a point for you if you're trying to object to them.
Yes, especially if you're arguing against a straw man God, you're not winning any points that way either.
Right. You're then disagreeing with a position they don't hold.
No, and I think that's where we get into... I think that's where we get into one of the things that somebody requested in the video, and I pointed out that in that particular video I was not going to be positing better arguments yet. That's for a future thing. This is part of that little project. So me and Ocean have talked about this, and we both kind of agree that attacking just the omnipotence part of an omni-god, let's just go ahead and say that it's Yahweh/Awa.
Awa. Awa. I will forever refer to the Muslim god as Awa.
It's Awa. It's like a baby's coup.
Just kidding. I can't do that.
It's a genocidal baby's coup. But no, if you're talking about an omni-god like Yahweh or Allah, then instead of trying to attack the omnipotent portion, you include that in a larger, broader argument. So, for instance, pointing out that you can't just attack the omnipotent portion.
But you can attack it with omnibenevolence.
Yes, you can attack all of the traits at once, and that can get you into other arguments that are a little more well-founded, like, say, the problem of evil, having an omnipotent
you can
God.
ignore, like, the other two. There's four omnis that matter with the Christian God. There's omnipotence, there's omniscience, and omnipresence, and omnibenevolence. And that is, all-powerful, all-knowing, present everywhere, and all good at the same time. Now, the two that are interesting here, omnibenevolence is the one that's kind of the odd man out, because it's the one that contradicts with the others really easily. And all-powerful and all good, if you're gonna attack omnipotence, the best way to attack it is through omnibenevolence and say, can your God lie? And lying is logically possible. An omnipotent God, it would make sense that they would be able to lie, because lying is logically possible. Yes. But an omnibenevolent God cannot lie. So the omnibenevolence provides limitations onto the omniscience. And therein lies a bit of the argument about the coherence of Christianity. That's when you get... that's when you start to get a little bit of a win and something that pushes against the Christian a little bit harder.
Yes.
But just attacking omnipotence with the rock thing is a dishonest tactic. Including omnibenevolence is where you can start to play the game a little bit harder.
Especially since most apologists, especially like William Lane Craig, has an entire series of videos on this. Not that I like Craig, I don't. But he has.
But he's good to listen to if you're going to try and have an honest conversation. Like,
yeah, if you're going to engage in counter apologetics, it might be a good idea to research the apologetics you're trying to counter.
Yeah.
That just kind of goes without saying. But he's got an entire thing on just the argument from the stone. Like, that's one of the big things he's actually focused on. And again, not a fan of Craig. And actually, first of all, I might want to clarify for people who might not know, if you're new to this channel, I am an atheist. So even though it might seem like in some cases I'm arguing for the theist position, I'm definitely not. I'm trying to give us better arguments against that. And Ocean here is not an atheist. Ocean is a theist.
I'm a polytheist, to be sure. So I'm not a Christian that's secretly giving the atheists a leg up.
He's just walking there like, do you want some good arguments against God? Here you go. Here's my anti.
But
he's just giving the anti-Craig powder. Anti-William Craig powder.
I'm a polytheist, so there's a lot of arguments that I agree with Christians on, and there's a lot of arguments that I agree with atheists on. And a lot of times when it's objections to Christianity, objections strictly to Christianity, I have a ton of agreement with atheists. And the omnipotence, omnibenevolence combined argument is one that I agree very seriously with atheists on, because I think that the Christian God, as described, with all of these properties, and don't even get me on the Trinity, is just an incoherent idea.
And on the Trinity, not all Christians believe in the Trinity either. So
right, but if you try to find one belief that all Christians hold, it's not even all Christians believe that Jesus existed. So that's going to get that. You're not going to be able to find something like that. Christians are incredibly varied in their approaches, and it gets into some other arguments against Christianity as far as how this God is communicating with Christians if he's perfect. But that's a whole nother matter.
Yeah, we can maybe address that one a little later on down the line if we still have time by the end of this, because
that one requires like its own video, I think.
Yeah, that's a whole bucket of issues, because you can incorporate that with both. The Christian and the Muslim God, because they both have the same issues when it comes to that.
Right.
So I don't want to beat the argument of the stone issue to the death, because we really could, but I don't think I really want to. The next argument, and possibly the one that had the most contention in the video, was the argument from first cause, specifically having the first cause be a timeless being, and somehow the thought that the timeless being is special pleading in here. It's not necessarily special pleading, it's a conclusion that is reached. So a timeless being, if whether it's Yahweh or anything else, and there's an explanation Ocean will be able to get into on this, but if you've got a timeless being of any sort that creates a finite universe, the universe is contentious on the reliant on the timeless being at that part. Not necessarily Yahweh. There are other timeless beings that can be there. For instance, Ocean, you ascribe to chaos for that, correct?
Right. I've used chaos as an example. I've also used Yggdrasil. I've also used an Egyptian idea for the same thing called Nu, N-U. All of them are kind of like primordials that are from whence something comes. And there's anyway. But the reason why the whole who created God thing, I think that's the argument we're talking about right now, right? That's the when the atheist goes, well, who created God? So the reason why that's kind of a dishonest approach, in the same sense of the straw man thing with the rock, I guess this has this exact same problem where it's like you're arguing against something that's not being proposed, and that's not going to win you any fights.
Yeah,
the Christian is usually when this comes up, the Christian is putting forth something similar to the Kalam cosmological argument, which is everything that begins to exist has a cause. So the first unmoved mover must be something that is uncaused. And Christians then ascribe a number of other properties to what this thing must be, that it must have a mind, that it must have power sufficient to create the universe, or it must be omnipotent, and so on and such as it. Power sufficient to create the universe is my thing. But
And an
it must
infinite
be
being would have
omnipotent,
power
it
sufficient.
must have a mind, it must have all these other things. So, when you're trying to say who created God, you're ignoring the whole rationale behind coming to that conclusion in the first place. And you're not arguing against the argument at that point.
You're arguing against a straw man version that you've created. If the God that they're using, or anything that they're using for the first cause argument, if it is timeless, it by definition does not necessarily require a creator. By saying that it does, you're not arguing against the God that they're positing at all.
Right.
You're not
changing.
anywhere.
It's a red herring. It's a non sequitur. When someone makes the Kalam argument and you say, well, but who created God? They're just going to respond, well, weren't you listening? If you want to find a hole in the argument, that's not it. It's there's a number of ways that you can criticize the Kalam, with regards to like necessity of the universe and so on, like whether or not existence, quote unquote, without the universe is a coherent idea, is a huge question, and that's one of the things that's been used against the Kalam. But that's not a who created God approach. That's an approach that actually addresses what the Kalam is trying to do. Because it could be that the universe isn't one of the things that began to exist. If the universe is a necessary property of existence in the first place, then it's the timeless entity.
Yes.
So that's the better way to go against the Kalam, not to say who created God, because who created God is an absurdity when it comes to this argument.
No, it's literally just trying to move a goalpost, except you are now the atheist moving a goalpost against somebody who most atheists will claim are the ones moving the goalposts all the time.
Right. The cornerstone is, did the universe begin to exist? Now,
we know that the universe as we know it began with the Big Bang. That's
right. And that's where the contention is that
Yeah.
as we know it, or is it did it turn into this from something else? Was it created by an entity? There's not a way that science is going to be revealing that for us, so we turn to philosophy. And philosophy has a number of answers regarding that. And the theist is going to be married to one position, and the atheist might have a preference for another position. But that's going to be... At that
point, you've got to argue against each other's positions, not your straw man version of those positions.
Right.
It's incredibly disingenuous to do so.
Correct.
The next two arguments, though, and this is another one that we could actually sit on for hours if we absolutely wanted to, because the unmoved mover and the timeless being, and that there's several ways to approach it, and I might approach it again in another video. But there are at least two other arguments that were posited in the video that I have heard that I would like to address here. They're a little simpler. I guess which do you want to go first? Do you want to go with the mental one, or do you want to go with the rational one?
Oh, let's do rationality first, because I think that, yeah. Or we can. It's difficult to do which one would go first. I do want to address something real quick that Michael's saying in the side chat as well. Michael's a friend of mine. He says smart things. He says the Christian theist might assert the necessity thing, and it must be an intelligent one. That's something that I simply disagree with. It's something that we were talking before the video started about the teleological argument from design. That is one of the arguments that asserts that there must have been a mind in order to do everything.
Yeah, and at that point, it's just an assertion.
Right. I don't think that that's a necessary. I think that the teleological argument is nowhere near as strong as the Kalam, but I also think that the Kalam adds in a whole bunch of extra properties. And another way to attack the Kalam is to put forward, this is something that I do a lot as a polytheist when engaging with Christians, is to talk about the properties that the Kalam advocates for. It says that there needs to be a mind, that it needs to be omniscient, and I don't think it needs any of these things. I think that it only needs to be something, it needs to be something with power sufficient to create the universe. That's it.
And it doesn't have to be Yahweh.
It can, and the polytheist can put forward the idea of chaos, Yggdrasil, or the Yggdrasil, or the or Nu. Any of those, either one of those three concepts will work, and you can kind of look those up if you want. Chaos is an ancient Greek idea, Yggdrasil is an ancient Norse idea, and Nu is an ancient Egyptian idea, and all of them have kind of the same attributes.
There's one thing that I'd like to address in here. Bionic Dance says that most theist arguments for God's existence are just assertions. That's the problem. I would say that's kind of both true and untrue.
These are arguments. They're not just assertions. That's the thing.
Yeah,
it comes from premises that people agree on.
Yeah, the difference between here is we're talking about something that's grounded in philosophy. And in philosophy, there are some things you can consider assertions, but most of it is constructed arguments. The constructed argument might end with an assertion, like saying that, okay, we have an unmoved mover, and that unmoved mover must have a mind, which me and Ocean both disagree with.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that's where the Kalam starts to slip in some assertions, and I don't agree with that. That's the reason why I put forward chaos and say, well, the Kalam argument actually has a different conclusion. It has a conclusion of something that's much simpler. And if you want to use Occam's razor in the conversation, you wind up with chaos instead of the Christian God, especially a God as complex.
You mean when the Occam's razor, you don't end up with Jeebus? Damn it.
But
sorry, I had to do it.
Shit. I was somewhere. Where did I go?
I derailed it.
You did. It's over.
Derailed my own stream.
I don't know what's going on anymore. Oh well. As far as assertions, so the for the Kalam, for example, starts with the premise everything that it begins to exist has a cause. Now, if that's a true premise, then we have a sound argument, because that's it's a lot of it's predicated upon that, and then it's the universe began to exist. Now, is that true? Because that's a premise too. And if you believe that the universe began to exist and everything that began to exist has a cause, that's where the Kalam tries to run to, and then that's when God becomes a conclusion rather than just an assertion.
Yes.
And the atheist might agree with those two concepts, and then at which point the Kalam becomes very difficult to deal with. But then the other criticism of the Kalam can be in where it gets its conclusions. The conclusions that it's pulling out of is this whole thing about a mind, this whole thing about all these other things.
Yeah, at that
but
point,
it could be that the source of the universe is something completely different than the Christian God.
And I was actually about to say the exact same thing, that at that point, the method of attacking the Kalam is saying, well, that doesn't logically follow. That line of logic can lead to scenario A, B, C, D, all the way down to Z. The fact that you picked X out of all of those does not make X special.
Right. The unmoved mover doesn't need a mind. It just needs to be an unmoved mover. And suggesting what moved the unmoved. It doesn't. That's not a good way to go about it. From there, I guess we can go into these other conversations about. Let's go ahead and take on Rationality.
The two other ones that are not necessarily dipping our heads into a bucket that literally doesn't have an end.
Right.
Because we could. There's no reason to. I guess we'll attack rationality first. So one of the points that I point in is that atheists need to stop. And I had at least one person bring up a comment on it. But that atheists should stop saying that theists are either stupid or irrational. And the reason I want to point that out, you can have a stupid belief, but not be a stupid person. For instance, racism. Racism is stupid. It is something that's not really logical. We very well understand that people of other races are not necessarily different than people of other races. However, there can be somebody who's incredibly intelligent, but is also a racist. It doesn't make them stupid. It makes them have a stupid idea that is undeniably stupid, but it does not it takes away from the intelligence of the person. It does not necessarily mean that the person is now all of a sudden stupid. Are Same thing with rationality. You can have an irrational belief.
A lot of times it's bad premises when it comes to racism.
True.
And I think that's true for a lot of things that are like reprehensible positions. A lot of times it's because somebody has bad premises somewhere in there.
And they think that, again, it's just like with the unmoved mover thing. They have scenario 1 through 50, and just because they picked 32 and 32 happened to be, oh, well, that's because black people. That didn't make scenario 32 correct. It didn't make it special. It still makes the idea stupid.
Right.
But it does not necessarily make the person stupid. And it's the same thing with rationality. You can have somebody who is a rational person who holds an irrational belief. For instance, I personally believe that ghosts are irrational. We don't see a lot of evidence for ghosts as far as I've been able to tell. I don't necessarily think that's a rational belief. However, I am not going to tell, say, my neighbor who may or may not believe in ghosts that they are now an irrational person, because for all I know, they might be an astrophysicist and rationality might be their middle name. They just happen to have this one irrational belief. And I'm staying away from that irrational belief being a type of theism for a reason. It's because I'm wanting to show that theism is not unlike these other beliefs that may or may not be considered irrational by one being or by one person or another.
Also, as far as ghosts, I did have like I don't know how trustworthy the story is, but I can see how if this happened to somebody, they could rationally come to the conclusion of ghosts, where, you know, like it involved a lot of strange things happening in the house, doors slamming and all that kind of shit. I think that, and it ended with her going to sleep one day and being pulled out from her bed by some unknown force and something holding her down on the floor until suddenly she was able to move and all the lights came on. And I could see a rationally minded person at least moving out of that house under the rational belief that they're being haunted.
Yes, and even though there are possibly other explanations, like a combination of a home invader plus sleep paralysis, or any number of
there's a number of things that could have happened.
Yes, but there's still the rational thought of, I don't know what happened. I might have an irrational explanation as to why it happened, but the rational person could still leave the house.
I think that a ghost is a rational explanation for that. I just do. So it's like you look at all the things that have happened, and then there's also like with it, because she talked about like appliances coming on and off, and even unplugging them and they'd still come on, and it was weird. And I don't know how much I trust her story. But
no, I personally would. The
story is true.
Granting that it's true.
Yeah, if we grant her story and we grant that this experience happened, then I can see the conclusion of a ghost being rational for that person. And I think that that's the same thing when it comes to like theism in general. People have experiences sometimes that they're not able to explain in any other way. And myself being one of these people, that I've had some experiences that have led me into a theistic mindset, and a lot of my beliefs are rested upon these experiences. And on top of that, I also agree with a lot of theistic arguments. So I think that with those things, push the levers on those, on the experience and then the philosophical arguments, I believe myself to be a rational person with a rational belief in theism, but I know that there's like whenever someone comes at me with all theists are irrational, I don't know what they're talking about necessarily.
No, and in the
I know
video,
that there's some people that are like, well, my pastor told me, therefore I believe, and that's irrational.
That is very much an irrationally held belief. In fact, actually, we would call that an argument from authority. The pastor's your authority, and you think that it's true because the pastor said it.
I think Steve would be like, it's an argument from authority that's an improper argument from authority. I think you can have an argument from authority for evolution if you're appealing to scientific body of data, for example. That's an argument from authority, but it still works.
Yeah.
But it's proper use of an argument from authority. The all theists are irrational position is one that I don't get, because a lot of the times when we're getting into these conversations, we start discussing arguments for theism that are rooted in logic. And to believe in a logical argument isn't irrational.
No, you have to have rationality in order to even start working on your premises in the first place, at least on some level. And it's the same thing with stupidity. You can have, like, for instance, when I was pointing out the issues with saying it's stupid, a lot of our mathematics came from Islamic scholars. Now, the mathematics did not come from Islam, which is a common apologetic that I've seen in some of their debates.
I've seen that too.
No, the mathematics did not come from Islam, so stop saying that Allah is the reason you can add. It's not true.
They were doing algebra under the Zoroastrian Persian Empire, weren't they? Maybe I'm wrong on that.
I would not be able to give you an honest answer on that because I don't know.
I know that the Persians were good at mathematics. Maybe they didn't invent algebra,
but I know that the reason I was pointing into that, though, is you do have people who were theistic and also came up with some of the groundwork for a lot of our sciences. Sir Isaac Newton was also a theist, and he came up with the groundwork for a lot of the theories of gravity that we have today that work on the planetary scale. Because, God damn it, if I have to have that argument with another flat earther, I might have to send an intercontinental over there. Fucking Newton's laws were wrong. No, they weren't. They worked on a planetary scale. Einstein's worked on a galactic scale. I'm like, well, when you get further than that, you'll need new ones. Then Einstein will be wrong. That doesn't mean he was wrong. It means
Fred Knotts is pointing out that they invented the number 0, which, yes, that's true.
Okay.
I think that I recall Robin Williams talking about the Crusaders are coming. Hide algebra and the number 0.
But that also one of the the reason that I wanted to say that is that when you call a theist irrational because they are a theist, you are no longer engaging them in an actual argument. You're no longer engaging them in conversation. You're dismissing them. And don't get me wrong, there are some theistic arguments that can be dismissed. If you've ever seen Ken Ham, believe me, there are some theists that should just be dismissed. But if you're going to want to have an
who doesn't help themselves. People like Matt Slick, who use a lot of these logical arguments, but then when questioned on them,
you're just a brain in a vat. You're just a brain in a vat.
Start doing stupid shit in order to distract themselves. That's when somebody like a theist who's making logical, rational arguments, like Matt Slick, honestly, he starts out with these logical, rational arguments.
It's the minute
but then when you start going back and forth with him, he starts playing all these games and playing hide the ball when you start pointing out some of the problems with those rational arguments.
That's actually what happened with the Matt Dillahunty debate with him. Is Matt, I think it was in the beginning of the debate.
It happened with me and him.
I didn't actually see all of your debate with him, but I know in Matt's, he knew that was the area that Slick was going to go. So he started out by saying, can we agree that in no part in this debate are we going to deal with the problem of absolute solipsism? Because I think it's a bullshit argument. And Matt was like, okay, I agree. And then when Matt was cornered, he immediately went into fucking solipsism.
Yeah,
and for those in the chat that don't know, solipsism is basically the idea that everything that you have around you is a projection from your brain, including the past, including everything possibly in the future. So how would you and there are some answers to absolute solipsism, but for the most part, there's no way for you to differentiate between whether or not you're a brain in the vat. And that's where Matt Slick, that's his retreat corner. That's where he goes.
I think it's a good tool for advancing the conversation if you're going to go to solipsism, but you need to be able to have a next step in order to go in the conversation. Because solipsism can be good when somebody's holding to like pure empiricism in a conversation with you, is when you're a theist and there's the other person who's going hardcore empiricism the whole time. Then you can start to go into
when you say it's true universe empiricism.
Oh, get out of my house. But when somebody does that, you can say, well, can you use empiricism then to say that the universe exists if you're just going off of, can you get out of solipsism with empiricism? The answer is no. So, that's the point that a lot of theists are trying to make when they bring up solipsism. But a lot of them don't know how to move the conversation then out of solipsism, because solipsism becomes a gotcha at that point.
Yes, and that's exactly how Slick tries to utilize it. He uses it as a...
They don't transition from there to justified beliefs, because then the theist doesn't have any reason to get out of solipsism either. They lack the same tools.
Well, not to mention, if Matt Slick retreats into solipsism, you can at least attack it by saying that, okay, if we're going to agree on solipsism now that we're in this territory, where is your God? Where is Yahweh?
Right.
Because if we're in solipsism now, by definition, that God is now a projection of your mind. Why are you worshiping a projection from your mind? Where has your argument gone now that you've led us down this road?
Yeah, but the theist is just trying to use it as a gotcha.
Yeah, and so they probably aren't even thinking that far along ahead.
Right, and then atheists generally don't go that route that you just went either. And I think that would be a good route to see some like a theist, especially a Christian, who retreats to solipsism really quickly and kind of like gets in their hermit crab position, and then you start to say, all right, well, let's both get out of here. Let's hold our hands and see how we can get out of solipsism. A lot of Christians don't know how to do that either.
No, because especially if you have
a belief to the word of God and all this shit, and it's just like, well, God says I'm not solipsist. Okay, well, how do you know that?
And if you're going to say that God says that you're not solipsistic, then why even retreat into that corner in the first place? It's like they're trying to give an argument to you and make you approach it from that side because they know that you're not as well versed in it. I think that's exactly what Matt Slick does. Is he tries to give that argument to his opponent and then make his opponent wiggle his way out of it, and he thinks that he's immune to it after that point.
And Slick is a good example for the whole like theist can be a rational thing, because he is somebody who uses a lot of the logical, rational arguments we were talking about earlier. But he's somebody that when you start talking to him, it's not clear that he just agrees with these arguments. There's something else going on with him. And it happens with a lot of theists, especially when you get into theists that do Christians, especially, that do the whole presuppositional apologetics situation, and that becomes a mess in and of itself. But it seems like there's something else at play that isn't what the argument is, because I don't think that anybody comes to Christianity convinced by presuppositional apologetics. I just don't think that it happens.
Are you saying that Psi 10 did not convert souls to the Lord?
I have my doubts. Maybe he managed to convince a few people that thought that it was intelligent or something like that. But I don't think that people that really think about the issue or have any sort of knowledge in the area are going to be convinced by presuppositional apologetics.
Nope.
It just works as a shutdown for atheism when the atheist isn't familiar with presuppositional apologetics. When the atheist is familiar with presuppositional apologetics, the name of the game changes a little bit. But and I think Psi 10 even said himself, it's just it's a shutdown. That was Greg Bonson. Can't remember who, but that it's a shutdown tactic, and that's it. But as far as saying that theists are irrational, when you get into a conversation with somebody like a presuppositionalist or like Matt Slick, they're using what seems like to be rational, logical arguments. But then in the conversation, they start to do things that are a little weird and that start to seem irrational. And that somebody that's having an honest conversation starts to realize, wait, this isn't a rational conversation. Mm-hmm. And from there, you might be able to come to the conclusion, well, theists are just fucking irrational. But that's not honest either.
No, it's not.
I think there's a lot of honest theists out there.
Yeah. And I think that kind of leads into painting with a broad brush. Really leads into the last one. This is the one that I have the most contention with, because there's a difference between saying that, hey, this argument against a god or this argument against this particular type of theism is not good. Please have a better constructed argument. I'm fine with having that. I'm fine with there being bad arguments out there, because bad arguments can be corrected. But there is one argument that I desperately want to see not used, and there's actually a comment in my comment section that I will gladly read off if anybody wants me to, that shows that there are, in fact, people who hold this belief. I know you were like, I didn't see that in there, and then I sent you the comment, and you were like, oh, what the fuck?
That's right. But this is that theists are mentally ill, right?
Yes, this is the all theists are mentally ill. And I think that people should not use that at all. I'm actually going to read the comment off because we're here.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said you conflated.
Read it with you.
You said you conflated two issues. Are religious people mentally ill? And is it wise to remind religious people that they are mentally ill during a debate? Just because the second one is false does not mean so must be the first. Religions are deliberately embracing delusions. The exact same behaviors without the cover of religion would be handled as mental illness. Voices in your head are labeled pathology unless you label them as God or Jesus, giving religion a pass for that excuse. Like that, excuse is the pathology of religion. It is like refusing to acknowledge that snakes are venomous. A delusion is just as destructive, whether it comes from the self or religion. It is more destructive. People will get to considerably more mischief when they act in groups. So the issue I have with this, he's very wrong here. And the issue that I have with this, do I believe that there are a lot of religions that deliberately embrace delusions? Absolutely. I believe that they are embracing something that is incorrect. Whether or not you want to call that a delusion is a completely different issue. I know that Richard Dawkins had this problem when he made the God delusion, where people contacted him and pointed out, could you not label this as a mental illness? This is not helping the case.
I read that book. Did he do that?
He labeled it the God delusion, and I think it was either in a later work or in the pre-opening of the book when he called it the God delusion.
I'm going to have to reread that. I read that in college, but I didn't.
I have to reread it again because I read it a year ago, and
you read it more recently than I did. I read it like 10 years ago.
Fair enough. It is a good book. I just think that the name of it might be a little off and not necessarily helpful. So while he is right that there are a lot of behaviors that will happen under the cover of religion that would be considered delusions. So for instance, you have people who have voices in the back of their head. The thing is, though, is that there are Christians. I'll just say specifically Christians, because this is where you get it most commonly. There are Christians that might claim to hear the voice of God, but it's not the same thing as like a schizophrenic voice in the back of your head. They might be saying that they're seeing a sign, and then they're interpreting that sign somewhere along the line. They might read something in a book and again see that as a sign. They might do what I used to do as a Christian and literally flip through their Bible, close their eyes, and slam their finger down on a passage and say that that was the passage that they need to live their life by this day. There are things that they can do to make them seem like God is communicating with them, but it is not the same thing as a mental illness that causes a voice in the back of your head. And when people conflate the two, I think it's incredibly disingenuous. It's incredibly disrespectful to people who actually do suffer from mental illnesses, and it's disrespectful to the theist. And if you're going to disrespect somebody, please disrespect them for their beliefs, not by calling them mentally ill.
Here's the issue that I have with this mainly. It's while it might be true that somebody whose mental illness is manifesting as a religious image would be harder to detect because of the nature of everything, it doesn't therefore mean that all theistic beliefs are mental illnesses, or that theism in general is a sign of mental illness.
No.
Because then we'd have to conclude that everybody in medieval Europe was mentally ill. And while everybody in medieval Europe, that they might have done some things that were pretty stupid sometimes, I don't think that you can make the case that the whole of Europe that was Christian was mentally ill at the same time just because they were Christian. Same with today. I think that the number of Christians is dwindling in America. I think it's something like 60-something% now of Americans are Christian. Used to be 80-something. Now, are we going to make the case that in the 90s, 80 to 90% of Americans were mentally ill?
No, we're not.
Because they had theistic beliefs. So saying that, religion is a mental illness is very much, it's broadening the definition of mental illness such to the extent that pretty much everybody's mentally ill now. And if mental illness is a meaningless standard of being human, then we have.
Then why do we even have the word in the first place there?
Mental illness. It's just you're well.
Yes.
So that becomes a huge problem. Now, there's something to be said with somebody whose mental illness is manifesting in religious imagery.
Yes, like when I did like my "What's the Harm in Belief" video, how there are people who will either do, say, not necessarily faith healing, but will say that God told them to stone their children, where there was a mental illness that was probably there already, and they're interpreting it now as the voice of God. Now you've got a completely different issue, though.
Did you ever see it was a Trading Places episode or something like that, or like Wife Swap or some shit, called God Warrior? You can probably find it on YouTube if you.
I have not.
It's one of those like reality shows where they wind up switching wives, and there was a pagan and a Christian pagan family and a Christian family, and they did the whole wife swap thing. And the pagan lady goes to live in the Christian house, and the Christian lady goes to live in the pagan house. And the Christian lady had such a vile reaction to everything that was going on in the pagan house. Just it wasn't willing to do anything. But there was also something else that was kind of odd about that, because both of these women were religious people. Yes. One of them was pagan. Like I think it was kind of like a Wiccan thing, and the other was very much like a charismatic Christian. Mm-hmm. Now, the charismatic Christian was responding in such a way where it seemed like there was a little bit more going on there than just her religion. It seemed like that maybe she had some kind of mental illness, but the way that it was manifesting was in a religious imagery. Mm-hmm. Whereas the theist, she's still a theist. The pagan that was in the other household was kind of like going with the flow and having a good time and learning new things and all that shit. And then when they switched, the woman has the Christian woman has like a total breakdown that this pagan woman was in her house and taught her children to meditate and all these other extreme things, and was screaming at everybody. And
so she was the fundiest of fundies.
If you watch it, it's clear that her reaction is an extremely religious one, but at the same time, it's also not entirely rational. And it seems like that there's something else that's probably going on there. And, from that perspective, you can say maybe this religious person might have a mental illness. I'm not willing to say whether or not she was mentally ill, but it's an example to look at and be like, well, this is one of those situations where people can have that confusion.
Yeah, and at that point,
but that doesn't mean that the belief system that she was holding, like charismatic Christians, they're weird, but they're not all mentally ill. And to say that religion itself as a mental illness is like Peter Boghossian level stupidity.
Yeah, it doesn't help any side of the conversation at all. It makes to be very frank and to not mince words here, it makes you look like an asshole, and it's calling the other person, I don't want to say less than a human being, because if somebody's got a mental illness, they're not less than a human being, but it's disrespecting the other person, and it's making you look like an ass.
It's disrespecting the problem of mental illness as well. I want to point that out as well, because I've know people that have various kinds of mental illnesses, ranging from schizophrenia to depression, etc., or PTSD is also a mental illness. And if you're just going to say religion is a mental illness and use that as a derogatory, what are you then saying about mental illnesses that are legitimate? Are you cheapening that whole scene, or like what's going on here? Like, if there's first you're using mental illness as a derogatory, and then second you're cheapening the whole problem that is mental illness that we have to deal with, and it's something that doesn't get enough attention in the first place.
Now, granted, there is one thing that I want to point out. There is another side to this. It is not just the atheists that do this. There are also, and I've seen this especially with, I hate this so many times, especially with Christians with stuff like this. But a lot of times, so for instance,
atheism is a mental illness. Have you?
Well, I've heard that, but no, actually, it's a little bit sneakier than that. It's a little bit sneakier. So, for instance, I suffer from depression and anxiety, and so when somebody else suffers from depression and anxiety, or either one of the two or both, I can empathize. But when it comes to an argument that I see a theist propose or a Christian propose sometimes, I have no idea. Pam was asking me about something, and I had no idea what it was. I know what you're asking about.
Skizzers.
I don't know where they are.
Skizzers.
I don't know where the scissors are. I don't know.
Skizzers, you fuck.
Okay. I still don't know where they are, though.
But pronounce them correctly.
God damn it.
What?
Skizzers.
No.
Pronounce them correctly.
I refuse to pronounce them that way.
Skizzers.
No.
Skizzers.
I don't feel like doing that
Skizzers.
anymore. I will throw what's left of my hammer at you. Where the hell did I even put it?
I think it's yeah, there it is.
Here we go. There was no thud, so we know that no domestic violence happened.
God damn it.
But, damn it, what was I going to say? Okay, so the thing that I see that happens, and it's very sneaky, is if you are suffering from depression and then somebody, or suicidal tendencies. Actually, I had a coworker who did this when I was working at my other job that I will not disclose, even though I'm no longer there anymore. I still don't want to do that because that's targeting a particular person. But if you're suffering from depression and then somebody says, well, you just need Jesus and then you won't have depression anymore.
Oh, God.
I hate that. Okay, so story time. I've said the story once on my channel, but it's pertinent to here. Story time. There was a woman who came into my workplace, and for point of argument, I worked in retail and I was a cashier. And she came up and said that she was going to kill me and that I needed to call the cops on her or she was going to kill herself. This person was very not mentally sound. Definitely needed some type of help. It's not the first time I've received a death threat, so I just kind of looked at her and went, I work in retail, right? I have no soul. Please do. Please kill me. You will be doing me a favor. No.
I am the soul skull in the cashier.
Pretty much. But when this person came in, by the time the police finally got there and escorted her out, one of our coworkers, who was a Reformed Calvinist, who kept his Bible and whatever apologetics book he was reading, or not apologetics, sorry, he's not that sophisticated, whatever theistic book he was reading at the time. I never saw him read anything that was not a pro-Christian book, like strictly read Christian material. But he would always have those books with him in the break room. And when this person was escorted outside and he hears that this person is suicidal, the first thing he does, he runs into the break room, grabs his Bible, and then runs out like he's some kind of action hero. And I'm just like, you will be causing way more damage than good if you walk out there.
Oh no!
And
like, it's what's worse is that he's trying to do this with a work uniform on.
Yes, he's doing it with a work uniform on.
He's got a corporate logo on his shirt.
And what makes it even worse is, and you know where we live. We live in the South, where everybody is Christian.
We both respawned at the same Waffle House, right?
Yes, we did. That's how we got here for this collaboration. We responded the exact same Waffle House in Georgia. That was something that we did not know with our first interactions, is we actually can throw rocks at each other from where we live. But regardless, what ended up happening, and was really weird, is I wanted to go out there in order to stop my coworker from making an ass of himself in every possible way, shape, and form. And my coworker was allowed to go out there with his Bible. But the minute that I wanted to go out there, I was barred. And I was told that I could not go out there. To which I looked to my manager and went, then why the hell is he allowed out there? We are technically closed. We don't have customers in the store. Why is he allowed to be out there during this? Is it because he walked out with a Bible? That's a completely different issue for another day. But I did want to point out that since we live in the South, that's something that happens in the South. Is if you walk out saying, I'm going to preach the Lord, apparently the rules no longer apply to you. It's very weird. But again, that kind of feeds into the whole, that's the other half of the argument, is that if you're a theist, I'm sorry, the answer to a mental illness is not theism. And if you're an atheist, the holding
the cause
to
of theism is not mental illness.
It's not mental illness. So in both ways, please keep mental illness away, whether you're a theist, whether you're an atheist. Please keep it so far away here and let medicine deal with it over there. Your apologetics are not going to work here, no matter which side of the argument you're on.
I will say that I think that religion, like with most problems in life, can help people cope with whatever problem. I think mental illness is not a limitation there.
True,
but
it can help you cope, but it's not a panacea.
Right, but it's not a panacea. It's not a solution. It's something that if you have a mental illness and you have a religion, the religion is not the cure.
No, it's not.
The cure should be,
a lot of times,
going to professionals. So you should seek professional help regarding mental illnesses.
And a lot of times, not necessarily that the religion itself is helping the individual. It's that the community aspect is helping the individual, and the religion is a good vehicle for that in a lot of cases. And I'm fine with that.
Christian Scientists have a problem with this kind of stuff, right? As well. It's like scientists or Jehovah's Witnesses. I know Scientology has this issue where they believe that psychiatry, psychology, and therapy in general is evil in some way, that they think that Scientology is a substitute for therapy.
Fun fact, I have a good friend of mine who is a biologist. He's not a biologist by trade yet, but he's in the middle of studying for it. I think he's in his 4th or 5th year right now. But he actually thinks he hates psychology, like absolutely hates it, and thinks that it's one of the worst fields of study. And yet we play, I don't know if you've ever played League of Legends before, but it is a game that people will get angry on quite often. And he falls into a lot of traps that, if you don't understand basic human psychology, happen. Like he'll say that, oh no, this thing is broken, this thing's horrible. And I'm like, you do understand that like our minds are
it's
wired.
Based on behaviorism.
Yeah, our minds are wired to focus on the negative things because that's a survival trait. So you're focusing on a negative thing, not because it's actually an issue, but because that's how your mind is wired. If you didn't hate psychology and you studied it, you would know this, as opposed to just saying psychology's stupid. Oh, by the way, I'm also going to ignore the reason why I'm thinking the things that I'm thinking.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about, as far as the Scientology thing, that there's a little bit of a double-edged sword here on the religion side that we were talking about that is in line with what you were saying. That during like around 2007, 2008, a lot of information about Scientology was pretty readily available online for reasons that have to do with the internet and Guy Fawkes masks. But a lot of the things that were revealed had to do with the Scientology's position on therapy in general, including psychology and psychiatry, whatever.
Are you saying that I should just get clear?
Yeah, you just need to hold on to those E-meters and get yourself clear, become OT level 6.
Yes.
And then you'll get rid of schizophrenia. There's I think Lisa McPherson was her name, that she was mentally ill, and the church saw as a solution to her being mentally ill locking her up in a hotel room, and through circumstances unknown, she managed to die in this hotel room, and was brought to the hospital with cockroach bites and all this other weird shit on her body, because this religion is so afraid of solving for mental illness in the traditional way, that they're willing to go to these kind of lengths in order to not seek professional help, which is absolutely reprehensible.
No,
Obviously.
it is, and psychology is not the only science that there are some religions that completely are against, like Jehovah's Witness. I don't know if they still have the
blood transfusion.
The blood transfusion thing.
Yeah, and Christian scientists will pray the whatever ailment away sometimes.
Yeah,
and it's
the
like
faith healing thing.
those beliefs we were talking about earlier, as far as rationality, those are irrational beliefs. Like even when you're trying to, we're talking about God in the first place. If you pray to God, God may or may not answer your prayer. If humans and this is me kind of talking as a polytheist, that you shouldn't depend on God or gods to save you. You should be depending on largely yourself. And this is something that, of course, I get into disagreements with Christians, but especially when you get into like Christian scientists and Jehovah's Witnesses, that this is where we get into like the whole God's plan thing. It's polytheists don't have this belief, but a lot of Christians do, where it's like if God wanted you to live, well, then you would. Except they're ignoring the whole idea. Well, that according to God's plan, hospitals exist. Come on, go to the fucking hospital. Blood transfusion exists, and that was part of God's plan. So the solution is sitting there in front of you. Take it.
The entire like predeterministic God's plan thing is an entire rabbit hole that I try to stay away from sometimes, because it's like a lot of beliefs that are held that, like for instance with the coworker who's a Reformed Calvinist, that's a predeterministic okay, I'm going to stop trying to say that word.
Deterministic.
This is just as bad. This is just as bad as Mr. Atheist with colloquial.
No, it started with me, and then I gave it to him.
You transferred.
I can't pronounce that word. I can't pronounce it.
But it's when you have those predeterministic positions. Part of that, like you said, part of that plan, part of that predetermination was to have a hospital built X amount of miles away from your house. Use the fucking hospital.
Right.
Go there and seek help, like whether that be for a psychological issue, you get in a car wreck, you need a blood transfusion. I'm sorry, you'll recover from the elders throwing you out. Trust me, you'll be fine. Just you won't recover from death, but you will recover from being thrown out from the watchtower. You'll be all right.
Is it God's plan that the Jehovah's Witness says no to the blood transfusion? That's another mess, though.
That's an entire
scriptural reason for that. I don't know what it is.
I would need to go. Actually, I might need to ask either Lloyd Evans or why am I forgetting his name right now? Telltale. Since they were both Jehovah's Witnesses, they might actually be a little more versed in the apologetics that are used for that, whichever verse they use for determining how that's going to be the case. I would need to ask them and figure that out.
Is there any other arguments that we want to kind of go through, or do you think that we pretty much... Uh-oh.
Hold on one second.
I guess we can take it to the chat as well.
Sorry, had to direct my roommate to where my multi-tool was. That may or may not have a corkscrew on it. Bobby, not in the pack itself. There's a mini pack on the side. It's on the belt itself. That's where you'll find the multi-tool. Yes, that pack. That is the pack for general supplies. That is the pack for the multi-tool. Okay.
That's why I found gummy bears.
Gummy bears are part of my general supplies. Have you not seen my moves? Ignoring your chat seems to be a better idea. Also, Tasteless Opinion says, who is Suris? Tasteless, you and I actually talked on the Krillism server earlier about our intuitions, irrational or irrational conversation. I came in there at the very tail end of that. Actually, I think you added me as a friend right after that as well. So here's the face to put to the person who got completely obliterated in there, because I am a very average rank philosopher. I am not good at this yet. I'm learning. Okay, guys on screen. The one who's behind a static avatar, that would be Ocean, and then me, Suris. I'm the one that typically would hide behind this cartoon avatar. That is what I use on my channel, unless I'm on a live hangout. There we go. With that said, do we have anything in there besides the besides the comment that ignoring the chat might be?
We've been getting a lot of shit talking of Scientology, which I'm okay with.
That's perfectly fine. Please shit talk Scientology all you want. Honestly, okay. So there's been a question posited sometimes. If you could snap your fingers and all religion would disappear, plus everything that came from it, would you? I would personally say no, because there's a lot of literature that comes from religion that I would not want to leave, like Dante's Inferno. It is not religious literature, but it is based on Christian literature to begin with. There's a lot of things that come from that. You would not have the God of War franchise if not for a type of religion that story was even able to come from in the first place. But
we wouldn't have the Hercules Disney cartoon either.
Please, no. That physically hurt. Okay, so let me just point out that Hercules is an okay movie in Disney's repertoire. But I will say this, you do not get the person who animated Pink Floyd's The Wall to animate a Disney movie. You don't. It just comes out weird.
It was a weird idea.
It was a really weird pick. But
I mean, obviously I wouldn't hit the button. I'd be committing suicide.
I wouldn't hit the button myself. However, if I could individually remove certain religions, Scientology would be on my list. Just click the button.
I'd probably agree with that.
Just click the button, like, okay, everybody who believed in it now, just that part of their mind is out. They're now clear. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if we're not killing anybody, that's also cool.
I'll take the joke that they're now clear. But that is one of the religions I think that just it can go. It can go very far away and stay in whatever abyss that a dead religion falls into. Wherever that happens.
Anything else that we want to cover, or is that pretty much it?
I think that's probably it. I mean, we both don't agree that we press the button, but, if that's what we get out of this. But I really think that's the main thing. Those are at least the points that I made in the video itself. And I know that a lot of people don't necessarily agree with the points I made in the video, and that's fine. The fact that you disagree, in some cases, kind of proves the point, especially the more asinine ones like religion is a mental illness. I'm still going to use that one. You can go in the comment section, you will find that.
The concluding point that I'd make, as far as especially with where the video started, was a lot of the times these arguments are creating a straw man, and you're not arguing with the person you're arguing against anymore. You're arguing with something that they're not representing, and that's not going to help you. And I think I said that a couple of times, but that's like really the point that I want to hammer home with that. That if you're going to argue against a theist, argue against their position, not a position that isn't what they're arguing for.
There is one question and I guess we'll make this the one question that we do address directly before we leave. Fred Knotts asked, do we think that science can shut down a lot of philosophy arguments? I think there are some arguments that you can use philosophy to get to. For instance, saying that demons are the cause of something as opposed to germ theory. There are premises you can use to get to that, and then science will shut that down. So yes, there are some arguments that science will shut down in philosophy, in my eyes.
You can come up with false conclusions using philosophy fairly easily if you have bad premises. Science is a good way to check on some of those premises. Problem is that a lot of science is based on philosophy, or all of science is based on philosophy. Without philosophy, you don't have science. So using science as a check is simply using a philosophy as a check on philosophy. Yeah,
because the entire scientific method is coming from a thought structure, and philosophy is, quite frankly, just thinking about how to think.
My pet peeve when we get into these conversations, when we start talking about philosophy, and it's like, well, I don't like philosophy, but I love science. As I've heard that a lot.
Science is predicated on philosophy.
Right. Philosophy is the foundation of science. That if you're a fan of science, you're a fan of a kind of philosophy.
And that's where I think that's definitely a good thing to possibly end on there. So in closing, for you to have science, you do have to have a level of philosophy. Kyle, I'm sorry. I had to do it. I had to do it. He's going to give me shit for that later, I know, if he even sees this one part, which he probably did. Love Kyle to death, though. If any of you are coming from the Non Sequitur show, Kyle is awesome. Me and him have had me and him have had conversations over Skype, though, where he's just like, no, philosophy's stupid. And I'm like, well, yeah, but you and Steve talk about this all the time. You don't like it when he talks about it either, so you're going to like it even less when other people talk about it.
I've had that conversation with him a couple of times as well.
I think everybody has. So for those who don't know, colors do not exist. Triangles are abstract, and I'm tired of having that conversation.
And if Kyle disagrees, he's a Neoplatonist.
With that said, thank everybody for coming out. This was awesome. Just having you guys come up after the non sequitur show for this. I wanted to say somewhat short. We originally planned on 20 minutes. Now we're here for an hour.
Yep, but that's what happened.
That's
I knew that would happen. That's the reason why I was like 20 minutes. If I say 20 minutes, we'll just do an hour.
Yeah, that's we kind of expected that was how we were going to go with it anyway. So again, thank you guys for coming out. Ocean, I literally I think it was maybe starting a month ago, we started actually talking more often as opposed to like the one-off on
tweeting back and forth.
Yeah, just happening to be on Twitter and conversing there. But hopefully, I addressed my point a little bit in here. Hopefully, you guys learned something from Ocean here. I know I've learned a little bit from him as well in the past, plus right now. Just say it, Steve is right. Non sequitur show. But with that said, thank you guys for coming. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream now. So hopefully you guys will like and subscribe if you like my content. If not, that's fine. I've already received death threats anyway, so it's nothing new.